Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Weaver and welcome to the American Migraine Foundation Facebook page live stream today on Facebook Live. I am a health coach and a recipe developer and a person with migraines. In the kitchen here with me today in San Diego is my husband on the camera, who likes to be known as Microwave Boy during live streams.
Hello, Steph.
And he's going to zoom in when you need to see things a little bit more closely. I want to thank the American Migraine Foundation for having me today. I'm really excited to be here with you and talking about one of my favorite topics, which is food, and how to eat well and take care of ourselves even when or if we get migraines. So feel free to ask questions as we go along. There'll be plenty of time for answering Q&A. If I don't get to a particular question during the live stream, I will come back and answer them. So feel free to ask those questions, and we'll look forward to talking with you. So this recipe, which is spicy kale and Swiss chard sauté, is from my book, which came out in February, The Migraine Relief Plan. It's an 8-week transition to better eating, fewer headaches, and optimal health. Now, this is not a cure for migraine, so I don't promise that. But what this book does is it's taken all the information that I learned when I was diagnosed 3.5 years ago, all the research that I did, and gives you an 8-week framework for getting onto what I call a migraine-friendly lifestyle. So getting farther away, living farther away from your migraine threshold, and really supporting your health with optimal nutrition. The book has 75 recipes in it that are free of known migraine triggers. It's anti-inflammatory. It's also gluten-free, sugar-free, salt-free, and nut-free except for coconuts. So it's good for lots of people on specialty diets or who have food allergies and sensitivities. So feel free to jump in with your questions as we're going along.
Hello from Jackie in
Hey,
Vancouver.
Great, thanks Jackie. So what I'm going to be doing today, as I said, I'm making spicy kale and Swiss chard sauté. So one of my little tricks when I'm working with greens is oftentimes will try to wash them right when I get home from the grocery store, and then I'll roll them up in a clean kitchen towel. So one of these big square cotton kitchen towels. I save my old ones until they basically start to fall apart for this very purpose, because these are fantastic to use for getting all the moisture off of greens. And if you haven't cooked with Swiss chard before, a lot of people know we all know we're supposed to eat greens. Everybody tells you you're supposed to eat greens, and a lot of people just don't because we don't know how to cook them. I used to be really intimidated by greens myself. So I wanted to introduce you to two of my favorite greens, kale and Swiss chard, as well as we've got green onions in this recipe, which has already been prepped up. But I wanted to show you a little trick for cutting Swiss chard. So my first tip for buying Swiss chard, and buy organic if you can afford it, is to buy the rainbow. So you notice that these stems are different colors. If you buy regular Swiss chard, which has green stems, sometimes they'll all be in a bunch with white stems or maybe red. But if you get the rainbow, what's really nice is you're getting these extra nutrients, they're called phytonutrients, they're plant-based nutrients that come with these different pigments, these different colors. So for the same price, you're getting a little bit of extra nutrition. Plus, these jewel tones make the finished dish look absolutely beautiful. So there's two ways to deal with the stems in Swiss chard, because the Swiss chard stems are kind of the texture of celery, and they need a little bit longer time to cook. The Swiss chard leaves are very delicate, and they don't need a ton of time to cook. So if you have one that's grown where it's kind of folded in half, then what I like to do is just lay it down and just cut that right off, right there. Take the end off of it, and then this one is not kind of doing that. This one's more open and flat. So in that case, I will just do what's called a V-cut. Always make sure you're keeping your fingers out of the way, of course.
Let's count on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, all still there. Yeah, hey, I'm a professional. And then, so then what you can do is you can kind of pile the leaves up, and you can cut up the stems. So, I've only got 2 here. Normally I might have 3 or 4. You want to, this is called the claw. You're holding your food like this very firmly with your fingers bent, so you're away from the blade, and you're keeping your fingers, you're backing up every, couple of cuts, so you're keeping your fingers away from the knife. And this allows you to get a really nice control as you're cutting. Also really nice even slices so things cook evenly. And look how pretty those colors are. I just absolutely love this dish so much. And it's also super adaptable. So if you don't want it spicy, you don't have to make it spicy. So I'm setting aside the Swiss chard stems, cut up stems, in a bowl because they're going to go into the hot pan second. Let me just show you a trick for cutting up these leaves. So not that anyone has ever rolled up a cigar, but everybody says, oh, when you do this, it's like rolling a cigar. It's like, well, it does, but I don't know anybody who's ever rolled a cigar. So, but if you roll them up really tightly, and you can also do this when you're cutting up herbs. This is called a chiffonade cut from the French. And you're just getting a nice tight roll on it, so then it allows you to cut that sort of unwieldy leaf really easily. And if you don't chop like this, I didn't used to chop like this either. I went to a knife skills class and I practice and practice and practice. I recommend doing that just because, not that you have to take a class, but you can also look at, stuff on the internet will teach you how to do knife skills, watching stuff like this. But practicing really helps because it makes food prep so much more enjoyable and fun. And then those are all ready to go. So let me tell you what the ingredients are. So it's kind of an easy thing to remember because there's 3 types of greens. So there's scallions or spring onions, any kind of kale, including the stems, and Swiss chard are the greens. There's 3 oils in this recipe: coconut oil, toasted sesame oil, which is a dark toasted sesame oil, and sesame chili oil.
Now,
and
is
this,
that the recipe on the cover of the book?
it is the recipe on the
You can
cover
see
of the
what
book.
it's kind of
Yeah,
like.
so this is what it's going to look like.
It's good too.
And sesame chili oil, the only thing about this is that you want to just look on the back and see if the ingredients just say sesame oil and chili. That's the brand that you want. I'm not necessarily recommending this particular brand, but some of them will have soybean oil as a filler or other things that we don't want in there. And then the dark toasted sesame oil is what will give it that sort of Asian-inspired flavor. And then there's 3 kinds of seeds. So we'll have pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, and sesame seeds. So those are all going to add protein and crunch for texture. And so I'm going to just move this out of the way and bring over our cooking pan. Hi, Grace. Hopefully you did okay in the storm. We've been watching all the news, and we have family and friends there, so we know that was a rough time with Irma. So I'm going to set this. So I don't normally cook in an electric pan. I normally cook on the stove. It's a little easier to demonstrate with this. So you want about medium. So I'm setting this at 325. I've got my 1 tablespoon of coconut oil in the pan already measured, and you can see that it's going to start melting. I'm going to have to wait for just a minute for it to melt fully. And then I'm going to start. So let me tell you why this is a migraine friendly recipe, or why this is in my book. So instead of using onions, which can be a trigger for a lot of people, we use green onions, which seem to be not a problem, probably because they're younger, so whatever the compound is that might be a problem for some people isn't in these yet. So these are also called scallions, Chinese onions, spring onions, and it's an entire bunch of these, just cut up the green parts, the white parts, all of it. So that's one reason this is migraine friendly. Greens are fantastic because they're full of antioxidants, which is super helpful for inflammation. And this book is all the recipes are anti-inflammatory. So there are there is, I guess, some controversy about whether or not food triggers are a real thing. Some doctors will say, no, they're not. That's just hasn't been studied well enough, or it's part of the premonitory phase of migraine, and people don't realize they already have a migraine when they're craving pizza the day before. And be that as it may, my sense after doing all the research is that I believe about 30 to 40% of people, myself included, are triggered by particular foods, and figuring out what your specific pattern is incredibly helpful, because then you don't have to avoid the very long list of foods. You can just go ahead and avoid those 2 or 3 things that you figure out you're sensitive to, and that's what my process will help you do. Okay, so my oil is melted. The trick with oil is you want to see a little bit of a shimmer on the top of the surface, but you don't ever want to see it smoking, because that means it's a little too hot. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in my green onions. You're going to hear a beautiful sizzle as they go in the pan. That's always what we're looking for. And I'm going to put my Swiss chard stems in, because they need a bit longer time to cook. You're going to start to see some really beautiful color as the heat starts to work its magic. And you'll notice that I haven't yet put, this is chopped minced garlic. I haven't put this in yet because garlic will burn really easily because it doesn't have a lot of moisture in it. Whoa, sorry, I just got a huge whiff of onion, like a waft of onion that is just really strong but very tasty smelling. So you want to wait until some of these vegetables have released a little bit of their moisture. You might have heard on a cooking show they talk about sweating onions. It's kind of a weird term because sweat doesn't sound like something you'd want to have in your food. But that releasing of the moisture then sort of protects the garlic and keeps it from burning. You also want to make sure your pan isn't too hot. Okay, so why else is, I'm going to let this cook for about maybe a minute and then I'll add my garlic and my jalapeno. So jalapeno has already been chopped up. This happens to be from our garden. And this is one of the optional items. So if you don't like spicy food, don't do the jalapeno. It's totally fine. You could also add like a bell pepper. I'm going to have to stand over here because that's really strong.
Downwind.
I am apparently downwind from this very aromatic dish. So that's just adds really, the goal with my recipes is that they're high flavor without added salt, because I personally have either Meniere's disease or migraine with vertigo or vestibular migraine or something. I got the dizziness thing going on off and on. And so I've found that managing my sodium intake has been really, really helpful. And I have a number of people in my Facebook group who have vestibular migraine who also are finding the diet to be really helpful and the plan to be really helpful. And so, but a lot of people when they hear about low sodium food think, oh, it's going to be tasteless. All these recipes have been designed and tested to be made completely without salt. They're high flavor, low sodium foods. And then you can add some sea salt at the table to taste where you're really going to notice it and just really sort of bring that flavor out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. Sorry, I just added the minced garlic. It's 3 cloves of garlic in this recipe. And I think the American Migraine Foundation is going to be posting the link as we go along to the recipe, so you'll be able to find it. If you want to just go ahead and try making this yourself, I'm adding the jalapeno. And I'm going to go ahead now and add my kale. So the kale is a much heartier green than the Swiss chard. I'm not going to add all of this today, otherwise it will take too long to cook live. But I'm going to just add a couple handfuls. And you'll notice that I did slice up the kale stems. A lot of people will tell you to strip the leaves off of the kale. The problem with that advice, these are the little kale stems, is that a lot of the potassium is in the stems. In one study, it was almost 100% of the potassium from the kale was in the stems. Another study, it was 30 to 40%. So you definitely want to have that nice potassium balance. And if you're on a diuretic like I am for my vestibular migraines, I have to take a potassium supplement. So I'm always trying to add more potassium-rich foods into my diet. And so that's why you want to keep those kale stems on there. Okay, so now you can see that we're getting some beautiful color off the kale. And I'm going to go ahead and add the Swiss chard leaves. Now the other trick with these is you want to sort of add them and sprinkle, because when you've cut them up in those little rolls, oftentimes they'll sort of clump together in the pan, which is not really what you want for the final dish. So go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to add my 2 other oils. Now you might think, wow, 3 tablespoons of oil sounds like a lot of oil. Well, I talk a lot in the book about healthy fats and the importance of healthy fats for the brain. Coconut oil is full of medium chain triglycerides, MCTs, which are known to be very healthy for the brain.
Which oil was that?
That's the I just put in the dark toasted sesame oil. And I'm going to put in, because we do like spicy food, Microwave Boy is very much a spicy food fan, so I'm going to put in apparently the last of this bottle, which is about a tablespoon of this dark toasted sesame oil. And both of these 2 oils, this is a soy-free plan because soy can be a trigger for a lot of people. So these 2 oils, the dark toasted sesame and the spicy sesame chili oil, are what give it that Asian-inspired flavor without adding soy sauce, which not only is potentially a trigger because of the soy, but it's also potentially a trigger because it's high sodium and it's fermented. So it's kind of a triple whammy on the soy sauce. So we're going to go ahead and stir this a little bit. And I'll have him come in for one more close-up in just a minute. But so these recipes, what I encourage people to do is start to, as you're adding more fiber, you're adding more vegetables, you're eating whole grains. It is a gluten-free plan, so we're gradually getting you off of gluten and sugar. Now, gluten and sugar are not known migraine triggers, so I want to make sure that there's not a confusion about that. The reason that my plan is gluten-free and sugar-free is because there's a lot of evidence that both of those are inflammatory foods. And when we have inflammation in our brain, we're much more likely to trigger into a migraine attack. So the idea is you're eating all these anti-inflammatory foods, the healthy fats, you're cutting way back on starchy carbohydrates and sugar, and that's going to be really good for your health overall. And one of the things I've said is that if all I do is help people get off of packaged and processed foods, I'm doing them a huge favor, because that's just so good for your health overall, and that's how we eat. Now, the last thing I'm going to add, and this may be where you want to come in for a close-up here, is our 3 seeds. So nuts can be migraine triggers for a lot of people, but seeds don't seem to be a problem.
Which seeds are these again?
So these are sesame seeds, and these are the tan, untoasted, so they're raw sesame seeds. You can use black ones as well, but in this dish I like to use the tan because they show up better. This is a tablespoon of sunflower seeds, again raw, untoasted, unsalted, and pumpkin seeds. Now these are adding textural crunch, and they're also adding protein. And so this is, and you can hear them pop because the heat is really just the perfect temperature. So
give you some plunk. It's surprising.
Yeah, and so that's when he talks about plunk, that's sort of that satisfying, hit your stomach and you really feel satisfied and full after a meal. So what might I serve this with? I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat down because it's pretty much finished. I would serve this with, so on the cover, it's shown with the maple sesame glazed chicken, which is a kind of a teriyaki style chicken. So that's a great pairing. Grilled chicken, broiled or grilled salmon would be great with this. Pork chops would be great with this. And if you're vegetarian, you absolutely can follow my plan. It's a little harder because a lot of the protein sources are not recommended during the sort of restrictive phase when you're following the plan really exactly. But a rinsed can of garbanzo beans added to this would make it a main dish, and that would be great. And you could serve it over, brown rice or another kind of, green like a grain like a quinoa might be really nice, or millet. Those would all be super yummy. So this could actually be a main dish. I would serve it for us as a side dish. Tonight we're having chicken, so this will be our side dish for tonight. So anybody have any questions for us?
We have check-ins from Easton, PA, Spotsylvania, and then Altamonte.
Oh, that's awesome. Hi, guys. Well, thank you so much. So do you guys have any questions? We have about 15 minutes. The food is actually done. But I'm happy to answer questions about nutrition in general for migraines and whole foods and anti-inflammatory diet. So do feel free. I'm going to continue.
How long did that?
So yeah, we started at about 5 after actually cooking it, and we're done at 10 and quarter after. So this took 10 minutes. Now, that does not include prep, and I'm a pretty fast prepper, so I can prep this in about 10 minutes. This all can also be prepped in advance. So this would be something on a weekend. You can prep all this stuff in advance, and then a Monday night, when you get home from work, you can make this in 10 or so minutes. And if you threw some really yummy meat in your slow cooker, then you'd have dinner ready when you get home. And all of the recipes in the book were tested by families as well as single people and couples, and there's people in 4 countries, so we got a lot of feedback. So they're all considered family friendly. Now, obviously, if your kids don't like spicy food, you would make it without the jalapeno and without this sesame chili oil, but then mom and dad could maybe add that onto their to their plate before they eat. So the other thing I wanted to say was that so the question about food triggers is definitely a thorny question. And when I was diagnosed 3.5 years ago, so I basically had migraines my whole life, but just didn't realize that I was having migraines. I thought they were weather headaches. And it wasn't until I started having vertigo attacks that I ended up going to a specialist and getting diagnosed. And I was lucky in that he said, oh, well, you might want to try the migraine diet. So, which was the low tyramine diet sheet. So it's a 3-page handout. I got home, I opened this refrigerator, and about 3/4 of the do not eat list was what was in my refrigerator.
Sarah wants to know, is it just organic ingredients that you use?
I personally do use organic, and I talk about that in the book, but it's not required. Obviously, food costs are always an issue for everyone. They're an issue for us too. What I found is that when I'm really careful about just buying what we're going to use and not wasting food, it turns out that about 25 to 30% of the food that most people bring home, we end up throwing out because we forget about it. You're going to be virtuous and you buy some kale and then you don't know how to make it, so you leave it in the back of the fridge and then you pull it out 2 weeks later and you're like, oh, I got to get rid of this. Well, if you spend $100 a week on groceries, for example, that means you're throwing out $25 to $30 worth of food. And if you can plan your shopping a little bit better, and know what you're going to be making, what I found is that extra 25 cents or 50 cents for that package of organic versus conventional, I can totally afford that within my budget because I'm not throwing that food out. So also there's something called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So if you go to the Environmental Working Group's website, they will tell you, like this year, which foods you really should buy organic, which have the most pesticides, and which are okay to buy conventional.
And
yeah.
Another question, what were the strategies you used to identify your own triggers?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. How do you identify your own triggers? Because that's the crazy making thing, right? The thing was, I got this list from my doctor, and every single list I started researching online, every list was different, right? One list said avocados were okay, the next one said they weren't. One said, this kind of beans was okay, the next one said they weren't. And so that's how I ended up writing the book. I would have loved to have been able to buy someone else's work and just followed it. Because the reason the list of do not eat foods is so long is that at some point someone has maybe reacted to it. So the list that I used as a basis for my work was the list that Dr. David Buchholz, who wrote Heal Your Headache, developed over 30 years of clinical practice. And the way that my plan works is that over 8 weeks, you're gradually getting onto the full, I guess I don't like to call it a diet, but the full eating plan. You don't change anything overnight. You have little tiny assignments each week. And then you're ideally live on that for 3 to 4 months. Then you actually test foods individually to see which ones are your specific triggers. So I found out that most foods didn't bother me. Cheese I can't really eat. It turns out I was sensitive to dairy and eggs, and fermented foods are really a no-go for me.
So does cooking or baking with ingredients known to trigger migraines decrease the risk that they'll trigger you?
So, the idea is that you ideally would go through this and then determine, oh, these 3 foods are the foods that really bother me. But the other thing is when you're following an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, and that includes, there's also stuff in the book about regular gentle exercise, regulating your sleep, drinking enough water, eating throughout the day, all of those things that pretty much every doctor agrees are very helpful for our migraine brains. It should help you live below your migraine threshold. And so then if you do have, occasionally I will have a little bit of cheese, but if I'm not, adding all these triggers together cumulatively, I'm doing my breathing and my meditation and my yoga, which helps decrease the stress chemicals in my body, all those things together. So the idea is, yes, you're going to be avoiding the foods that you learn are problematic for you, and then you're just cooking and baking from those foods that you know are going to be supportive for your health. And there's a much longer list of foods that you can eat than you can't eat.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jackie was wondering, you're going to be supplying the link to some of these websites that you referenced once the stream ends.
Absolutely. I will go in and put those links in there for sure, Jackie. Thanks for the question. Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
No, they didn't mention it, but I thought it might be helpful.
Yeah.
Once you started your plan, what was your migraine frequency before?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good thing. So when I was diagnosed, I was dizzy all the time. I was having 3 to 5 migraine days a week, which included nausea and vomiting. Super fun. And once I was on the plan, figured out what the plan was and was on it for about 2 months, I woke up one day, I didn't have a daily headache anymore, and I'd had a daily headache for so long that I didn't actually know how long it was, maybe 10 years. I really have no idea. So I had a daily headache, 3 to 5 migraine days a week, and now I have about 1 to 2 migraine days a month and no daily headache. Now, I do still sometimes have some vertigo issues. I also have some chronic pain stuff going on, possibly fibromyalgia, some inflammatory stuff. So this is why I live on the plan, is because I feel as well as I possibly can when I'm able to, eat this way, cook this way. And there's also information in the book about eating out, so how to choose good restaurants, how to look at menus, how to manage family situations, because that's really challenging. So we have about 5 more minutes if you have any more questions.
There's a question.
Okay,
Do you
great.
know if and why cheese would be a trigger?
2 reasons. It seems like migraine-prone people may have higher incidence of food sensitivity. So it's very possible that the issue is that you're actually sensitive to dairy and the protein in dairy. So that's one possibility. The second is that cheese is fermented, and fermented foods are higher in a naturally occurring substance called tyramine, which is it's a breakdown of an amino acid. It's naturally occurring in food, but the older a food is, so an aged salami, an aged cheese, aged wine, all of those delicious foods that are lovely to look at on a cheese platter at the wine bar, those all seem to be problematic for migraines. So that's why the ideas for this is to help you live as migraine-free as possible. And everybody's going to be different, but it allows you to sort of figure out what's going to work best for your lifestyle. You may have a job where you're out and you have to go to events all the time, and so this could help you figure out, well, how do I navigate those? I have a food website, and so I often go to food events, so I have to figure out, well, am I going to be able to eat food there? Sometimes, I have to taste stuff that might be migraine prone. So I can sort of work through that because that's what this plan allows you to do.
Casey says she loves your book. Thanks for having her on. And Liza wants to know where she can get the book.
The book is available online and in any bookstores that they can order it for you. Independent bookstores, Barnes & Noble has it. You can order it at any online bookseller as well.
Search
Migraine Relief Plan. And also I have a really supportive group, Migraine Relief Plan, on Facebook. You can follow me on Facebook. Stephanie Weaver MPH is my page. I do frequent cooking demonstrations on Facebook Lives where I answer questions. I'm also S. Weaver MPH on all the other social media platforms. So we have 2 or 3 more minutes if anybody has any last questions. I do want to thank the American Migraine Foundation. I'm super grateful to them for having me on today. I think nutrition is such an important topic for all of us to support our health, and so I really appreciate them inviting me to be able to talk to you today, so thank you so much. And you might have noticed my dog is walking through. She completely ignores us until the food comes out, or somehow she knows we're broadcasting. I'm not sure how that is.
Okay, and one last question here from Sarah, who has migraines that are hormonal.
Okay.
Do you have any success stories with people who do this meal plan who have hormonal migraines?
Yeah, I think so. The book came out in February, so the early adopters of the book, people that bought it early, are just now getting into the trigger testing phase, because it is about 6 months where you're kind of getting onto the plan and then living on the plan. My sense is that it should help with all types of migraines, and I think the other aspect. So the reason hormonal migraines are an issue, right, is because women's hormonal cycles change, right? Migraine pains seem to like everything being as regular as possible. So going to sleep at the same time every night, getting up at the same time every morning, 7 days a week, right? Not having a different weekend schedule, drinking water throughout the day, making sure you're eating regularly. You don't have to eat all day long, but making sure you're not having blood sugar issues. So if you can get all of those things kind of regulated, that should help your body and your brain sort of deal with the hormonal change, which you can't deal with.
That kind of came on for you, right?
Yeah, so I don't know that I had hormonal migraines because I was on the birth control pills basically my whole adult life because I had really terrible periods. So I didn't have that huge hormonal drop, and certainly I would talk with your doctor about trying out different types of birth control because some really will help with migraine. And there's Dr. Susan Hutchinson has a fantastic book about you know, hormonal migraines and women's issues in general relating to migraine. So I can put that link in the stream as well. So that's something I don't address super directly in the book, but I do feel like, and maybe you know, if you join my Facebook group, people can answer that question. I'm not sure the age range. I know there's some young women in the group who are just kind of getting into the plan now, so it might be a little too early. But all the people who tested my program, I did test it with 2 different groups of migraine sufferers, the original summer I was working on it, and everyone saw improvement to some degree, so that was really encouraging. Great, I think it's about time for us to wrap up. Again, I want to thank the American Migraine Foundation for having me. It's a wonderful organization. If you're not a member, please do join. Thank you for watching me make my spicy kale and Swiss chard sauté, and I hope that you will come by either my page or the group or this link, this stream, and let us know if you made the recipe, because that makes me super happy when people tell me that they've actually made a recipe and they loved it. Thanks again. I'm Stephanie Weaver from San Diego. Bye, guys.